When I saw the flashing lights and roaring engines slicing across my wheat fields, I thought I was dreaming. A runway, an actual paved runway, was being laid down right through the middle of my family farm. Construction crews, bulldozers, and bright orange cones stretched as far as I could see. And the worst part, the HOA board, with smug smiles, said it was approved by the community. My community, my land, my heritage. They thought I was just another quiet farmer, someone they could push around and steal from. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't just the owner of this farm. I was the United States Secretary of Transportation, the man who signs off on every single federal aviation project in the country. They built a runway on the wrong man's land, and I was about to make them regret every inch of it. The morning began like any other on my family farm, quiet, golden, and full of promise. The rising sun spread a warm glow over the endless fields of wheat, turning each stalk into a shimmering strand of light. The air was cool and fresh, filled with the faint hum of crickets and the gentle rustling of the wind. It was one of those mornings that made you stop and breathe in gratitude. I stood on the porch, a steaming mug of coffee in hand, listening to the peaceful rhythm of life on the land my family had worked for generations. My father had always said, a farmer doesn't just grow crops, he grows roots. And that's exactly how I felt about this place. It wasn't just dirt and seed, it was my life's foundation. But peace has a strange way of breaking fast and without warning. It started as a faint vibration under my boots, then a low rumble that rolled across the fields like thunder. I frowned, lowering my cup as the sound grew louder. Within minutes, a line of large construction trucks appeared over the hill, white dump trucks, yellow bulldozers, and a few cement mixers trailing behind. Dust kicked up into the morning air as the convoy pulled onto my property, heading straight for the heart of my wheat field. I stepped off the porch and walked briskly down the dirt path, waving my hand. Hey, you're on private property, I shouted, my voice cutting through the noise. A man in an orange vest and hard hat hopped out of one of the trucks and started toward me, holding a clipboard. His expression was brisk and detached, the look of someone used to brushing off complaints. Morning, sir, he said without meeting my eyes. We're here to begin work on the runway expansion. I blinked. Runway, he nodded, checking something on his clipboard. Community project, approved by the HOA board. Phase 1 starts today. For a moment, I thought he was joking. I even laughed, shaking my head. You've got the wrong property. This is a working farm, not an airfield. The man didn't smile. This address matches the plan. If you have concerns, take it up with your HOA. We're on a tight schedule. Then he turned and motioned to his crew, shouting orders over the roar of engines. Within seconds, bulldozers were rolling forward, cutting into the soil that I had spent years nurturing. My stomach twisted as I watched one of them crush through the edge of my irrigation line, spraying water into the air. The smell of fuel and hot metal filled the field. My land, my home, was being torn apart before my eyes. I rushed up to the foreman again, grabbing the clipboard out of his hand. The document was stamped with the familiar green seal of the Homeowners Association. At the bottom, I saw the signature of Karen Watkins, the HOA president, a woman who treated every resident like a disobedient student in her personal classroom. The paper said approved for construction, but it didn't have my name, my consent, or even my acknowledgement. This is illegal, I said firmly, handing it back. You have no authority here. He just shrugged. Not my problem, sir. HOA approved it. We follow orders. Anger burned in my chest as I stared at the mess forming across my fields. I pulled out my phone and dialed the HOA office, my fingers shaking. After several rings, a cheerful receptionist answered. Good morning, Oak Ridge Community Office. How can I help you? This is John Hargrove. There's construction happening on my property right now. They're tearing up my wheat fields. Who authorized this? There was a pause on the other end. Oh, Mr. Hargrove. Yes, that's the new runway project. It was approved last month by the board. I wasn't even informed about any meeting, I snapped. Well, she replied with that overly polite tone HOA staff use when they know they're wrong. Not everyone attends, but all members were sent an email survey. You didn't respond, so your silence counted as consent. I felt my blood pressure spike. You're telling me my silence gave you permission to bulldoze my farm? That's how community decisions work. Sir, she said sweetly, if you'd like to file a formal complaint, I can schedule you for the next meeting. I hung up before I said something I'd regret. Around me, the chaos continued. Trucks rumbling, dirt flying, engines roaring. My peaceful morning had turned into a nightmare. I stood there in disbelief as decades of my family's labor were torn apart like it meant nothing. By afternoon, a long strip of my farm had been flattened and leveled. Survey poles dotted the ground where crops had once grown tall. I leaned against my pickup truck, watching as men laughed and chatted, treating my land like a playground. I wanted to scream, but instead, I stayed quiet, thinking because deep down, I knew something they didn't. They thought I was just a simple farmer. They thought they could trample over my rights and walk away untouched. But I wasn't just the owner of this land. Behind my worn flannel and dusty boots, I was John Hargrove, the United States Secretary of Transportation, the man who oversees every federal aviation project in the country. So I took a slow breath, staring at the chaos in my field, and muttered under my breath, All right, Karen. You just paved your own runway straight into a federal storm. As the sun dipped low over the horizon, painting the wrecked earth in shades of orange and red, I made myself a promise. This farm wasn't going to be taken from me. Not by arrogance. Not by greed, and certainly not by an HOA that thought it ruled the sky. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. The smell of diesel still lingered in the air, mixing with the faint sweetness of crushed wheat. My fields, once golden and full of life, now looked like a battlefield. Tire tracks crisscrossed the dirt, irrigation pipes lay broken, and a long strip of flattened earth cut straight through the center. I stood there for a long time, letting the anger settle into something colder, sharper. I wasn't going to lose my temper. I was going to make this right, carefully, legally, and completely. After a quick shower and a change of clothes, I climbed into my truck and drove toward the HOA office in town. The Oak Ridge Community Association building sat right at the edge of the suburban area, far from any of the real farmland. It was a shiny glass structure with polished floors, potted plants, and a fake sense of authority that reeked of self-importance. As I pulled into the parking lot, I saw familiar cars, spotless SUVs, and sedans that belonged to the same people who thought they could decide what happened on my land. Inside, the air was cool and overly perfumed. A receptionist looked up from her desk, her smile practiced and empty. "Good morning, sir. Do you have an appointment?" "I'm here to speak with Karen Watkins," I said evenly. "Tell her John Hargrove wants a word." Her eyes widened just slightly. "Oh, one moment, please." She picked up the phone, murmured something, and then nodded toward the hallway. "You can go in. She's expecting you." I didn't bother asking how she was already expecting me. People like Karen always expected confrontation. They thrived on control. I walked down the hall and pushed open the glass door to the main boardroom. There she was, Karen Watkins. Sitting at the head of the table, dressed in her usual pastel suit and pearl necklace, her expression was calm, smug even, as if she were already the victor in an argument that hadn't started yet. Two other board members sat beside her, Paul, the treasurer, who always looked like he was doing math in his head, and Linda, the secretary, who never met a rumor she didn't repeat. "Ah, John," Karen said with a bright smile. "Come in, please. We were just reviewing the airstrip plans." I shut the door behind me and took a seat across from them. "Let's skip the pleasantries," I said. "You've built half a runway through my farm. I want to know who gave you permission." Karen folded her hands neatly on the table. "The board approved it," she said. "As you know, the Oak Ridge community voted to construct a private runway for small aircraft access. We had overwhelming support." "Overwhelming support," I echoed, raising an eyebrow. "From who?" "Because I never saw a ballot, a notice, or a meeting invitation." She tilted her head, feigning sympathy. "You were emailed, Mr. Hargrove, several times. You didn't respond, which, according to HOA bylaws, counts as a consent by silence." I leaned forward, my voice calm but firm. "Consent by silence doesn't override federal property rights. Karen, you have no jurisdiction over my farmland." Her smile faltered slightly, but she recovered fast. "Your property is within Oak Ridge boundaries, which gives us shared rights for community enhancement projects." "Enhancement?" I said, my patience thinning. "You've destroyed my irrigation lines, torn up hundreds of acres of planted wheat, and bulldozed private property. That's not enhancement, that's trespassing." Paul, the treasurer, cleared his throat. "Now, Mr. Hargrove, let's not get emotional. This project will raise property values for everyone in the area, including you." I looked at him squarely. "I didn't ask for my property value to rise. I asked for my property to be left alone." Karen sighed, clearly annoyed that her charm wasn't working. "John, we understand your frustration, but progress requires sacrifice," the community decided, "and we can't reverse that now. The construction is already underway." I stared at her for a long moment, letting her words hang in the air. "You really believe you're untouchable, don't you?" I said softly. Karen leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "We're following local governance. Everything is perfectly legal." I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. "You might want to read up on federal law before you go around paving airstrips on private farmland. There's a reason airports require authorization from the Department of Transportation and the FAA. Her confident look wavered. "This is a private runway," she said quickly. "We don't need federal approval." "Actually," I said quietly, "you do. Any structure capable of accommodating aircraft, even private ones, falls under FAA jurisdiction. And as it happens, I know the process pretty well." The room fell silent. Paul's pen froze mid-scribble. Linda's eyes darted between Karen and me. Karen gave a small, nervous laugh. "And how exactly would you know that?" I met her gaze steadily. "Because I'm John Hargrove, the United States Secretary of Transportation." The color drained from her face. For once, the confident HOA queen had no quick response. Paul's jaw dropped slightly, and Linda's pen clattered to the table. "I came here out of respect," I continued calmly. "I wanted to give you a chance to correct your mistake before I turn this into a federal case. But since you've made it clear that you're not interested in doing the right thing, I'll make sure the FAA and every state agency involved knows what you've done." Karen tried to speak, but her words came out shaky. "Mr. Hargrove, I'm sure we can resolve this too late, I interrupted. You trespassed, destroyed private property, and authorized an unapproved aviation structure. That's not a local issue anymore. That's federal. I stood, smoothing the front of my jacket. You wanted a runway, Karen. Congratulations. Now you'll have the FAA landing right on your doorstep. As I walked out, I could feel the silence follow me like a shadow. The hallway seemed brighter now, almost mocking in its perfection. The receptionist glanced up, nervous, as I passed. But I didn't stop. I stepped into the sunlight, took one last look at that polished building, and got into my truck. They thought they could take my land. They thought I was just a farmer. But now, the fight had officially taken off, and this time, they were flying straight into a federal storm. The following morning, my farm was quieter than usual. The construction crews hadn't returned, but the damage they left behind was a brutal reminder of what had happened. Deep tire marks cut through my wheat fields like scars, and the long black strip of unfinished asphalt glistened under the morning sun. The air smelled of tar and dust, the scent of arrogance and destruction. I stood there, hands on my hips, watching the sunlight stretch over the wreckage, and I made a silent promise to myself. By the time this was over, that runway would be nothing more than a bad memory, and the people responsible would never forget my name. After breakfast, I headed to my small home office, a converted corner of the farmhouse filled with paperwork, old photographs, and a computer that held far more power than most people realized. As Secretary of Transportation, I had access to internal systems that monitored and approved every aviation-related project across the United States. The HOA might have bullied local residents and manipulated their bylaws, but they'd crossed into a domain they didn't understand. They weren't just trespassing on my land. They were trespassing on federal territory. I opened my laptop and logged into the Department of Transportation's secure database. My credentials still gave me direct access to project authorization networks, including the FAA's internal registry. Within minutes, I found what I was looking for, a detailed map of registered and pending airstrip projects in the state. As I expected, there was no mention of Oak Ridge or anything near my coordinates. That meant one thing: their so-called community project was completely unapproved and illegal under federal law. I drafted a formal report to the FAA's Regional Enforcement Division, attaching photos of the construction, a copy of the HOA's approval document, and a geolocation map highlighting the violation. I didn't need to exaggerate, the evidence spoke for itself. Within hours, I received a reply from an FAA investigator named Mark Dana. He confirmed receipt of the complaint and said an inspection team would be dispatched the next morning. His closing line made me smile. If this construction violates federal aviation code, we'll make sure it doesn't last the week. By noon, I decided to take a drive around the community. I wanted to see how far the HOA's influence reached. The closer I got to the residential area, the more I noticed signs of their power: identical mailboxes, spotless lawns, HOA-approved banners, and neighbors too afraid to make eye contact. When I passed a few houses near the new runway zone, several people stepped out to talk. They looked nervous. One woman, Mrs. Langley, waved me over. "Mr. Hargrove," she said quietly, glancing around as if she might be overheard. "I just want you to know, not everyone supported this project. We got pressured into it. Karen said it was mandatory progress, and that opposing it would affect our property standing." I nodded. "She threatened you." "She threatened everyone," Mrs. Langley said. "Some people got fines for speaking against it. Others were told their yards violated community code until they stopped complaining." She sighed, shaking her head. "We thought it would stop once construction began. We didn't know it was your land they were taking." I thanked her and promised things were about to change. As I drove away, I noticed something for every polished house and perfect garden. There was a family living in quiet fear of that board. The HOA had become less of a neighborhood association and more of a small-town dictatorship. They used fake authority to control people who just wanted peace. But that peace had an expiration date now. The next morning came with a surprise. I was sitting on the porch, sipping my coffee, when 3 black SUVs pulled up the dirt road. Men in dark suits and FAA windbreakers stepped out, accompanied by 2 state troopers. The lead investigator, Mark Danner, was a tall man with a calm, professional demeanor. He introduced himself and showed his ID. "Mr. Hargrove," he said, "we're here to inspect an unregistered airstrip construction on your property. You filed the complaint?" I nodded. "That's right. They built half a runway across my farm without my consent." He turned to his team. "All right, let's take a look." For the next 2 hours, the agents documented everything. They took photos, measured distances, and collected soil samples near the asphalt. They even checked the contractor's equipment and discovered the machinery was rented under the HOA's name using misreported funds. It was worse than I expected. When Karen and her board arrived, clearly alerted by someone, her face turned bright red at the sight of the agents. She marched up to us, voice trembling with anger. "Excuse me? This is private property. You have no right to be here without HOA authorization." Mark calmly turned to her. "Ma'am, this is federal property inspection under FAA Code 14 CFR. Your authorization doesn't apply here." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. You can't do this. We're improving the community. We have the right. Mark handed her a printed document. This notice states, your construction violates federal aviation law. You're hereby ordered to cease all activity immediately. Further work will result in fines and potential criminal charges. She snatched the paper, her hands shaking. This is ridiculous. You can't just shut us down like this. I stepped forward, my tone calm but cold. Actually, Karen, I can. I signed that authorization myself. Her eyes went wide as realization hit her. You, she whispered, almost choking on the words. You did this. I didn't do anything, I said. You did when you built a runway through a federal officer's farm. The agents began marking the site with red flags and tape, designating it under investigation. Karen tried to argue, but every word made her sound more desperate. When the agents packed up to leave, she stood there speechless, clutching her clipboard like it was a shield. That night, I received a call from Mark. The FAA had officially launched an investigation into the HOA's activities, including financial fraud, zoning violations, and misuse of federal land. The case was being escalated to the Department of Justice. As I hung up, I walked outside and looked over my quiet, broken field. The stars stretched across the sky, calm and endless. For the first time in weeks, I felt peace again. The storm had begun, and this time, it wasn't coming for me. It was coming for them. The days that followed were a whirlwind of phone calls, official visits, and nervous whispers around the neighborhood. The once proud HOA board that strutted around like royalty was now hiding behind closed doors, avoiding reporters and pretending nothing was wrong. But everyone knew something was very wrong. The FAA investigation had cracked open a door that could no longer be closed, and what spilled out was far more rotten than anyone imagined. I started each morning walking through my farm, noting the damage, documenting everything. The broken irrigation lines, the ruined soil, the bent fencing, all of it served as evidence of what the HOA had done. The agents who visited each day worked with quiet precision. They collected documents, interviewed residents, and dug into HOA financial records. I had seen bureaucratic investigations before, but never from this side of the fence. There was something deeply satisfying about watching justice unfold right on the land they had tried to steal from me. By midweek, I received a call from Mark Danner, the FAA investigator. Mr. Hargrove, he said, his tone crisp but respectful. Our team found multiple violations. Your HOA not only bypassed FAA approval, but they also used misappropriated community funds to pay for the contractors. It seems they disguised the payments as landscaping and improvement projects. I leaned back in my chair, shaking my head. So they lied to the residents, too. Exactly, he said. And it gets worse. The construction company they hired wasn't even licensed for aviation work. They used a small local contractor that specializes in parking lots. That made sense. The runway they poured wasn't even two-coated, was a poorly made strip of asphalt that would have cracked within a year. But to the HOA, appearance mattered more than legality. They wanted to show off, to tell their friends they lived in a community with a private airstrip. They had no idea what they were playing with. That evening, I drove into town for groceries, and everywhere I went, people whispered. Some nodded politely. Others avoided eye contact altogether. A few even approached me quietly, thanking me for standing up to the board. They've been bullying everyone for years. One man told me, near the produce section, if we so much as parked a truck in the wrong spot, they'd fine us. But they can pave a runway and think it's okay. Not anymore. Back on the farm, the reporters started arriving. Local news stations parked their vans on the roadside, cameras aimed toward the now silent construction site. One reporter, a young woman named Erica, asked if I'd go on record. I agreed, but only on one condition, that the focus remain on justice, not revenge. She nodded and rolled her camera. Mr. Hargrove, she began. The community is shocked by the ongoing investigation. How do you feel seeing federal agents on your property? I looked at the camera, calm but firm. I feel like the system is finally working. What happened here isn't just about land, it's about people who think power means permission. The HOA tried to turn this community into their personal kingdom, and they forgot one thing. Nobody's above the law. That interview spread fast. Within hours, the story hit state-level news. U.S. Secretary of Transportation exposes HOA fraud flashed across headlines. And suddenly, Karen Watkins' empire began to crumble. The next day, I got a call from a local resident, whispering nervously. You didn't hear this from me, she said, but Karen's been shredding papers at the HOA office since last night. They're trying to hide something. I thanked her and immediately phoned Mark. They're destroying evidence. I told him. Understood, he replied. We're on our way. By afternoon, a team of federal agents showed up with a search warrant. I followed them to the HOA headquarters, where Karen was pacing in the lobby with a forced smile plastered across her face. When she saw me walk in behind the agents, her expression hardened. John, she said sharply, this is harassment. You're abusing your power. No, Karen, I said quietly. This is accountability. The agents entered the boardroom and began securing documents. hard drives, and financial ledgers. One of them opened a cabinet full of half-burned papers and flash drives. It was clear she'd tried to get rid of the evidence overnight. As they boxed everything up, Karen's facade began to crack. Her hands trembled, and her once commanding voice turned shaky. "This is all a misunderstanding," she said, trying to sound confident. "We just wanted to improve the neighborhood." Mark looked at her, unimpressed. By committing fraud and building an unauthorized runway on federal land, her silence was answer enough. That evening, as the agents left with boxes of confiscated materials, I watched Karen walk out of the building, shoulders slumped, eyes red. For a brief moment, I almost pitied her, almost. But then I remembered the way she'd smiled when I begged her to stop construction. The way she'd mocked me with her consent by silence. Nonsense. No, she wasn't sorry she did, she was sorry she got caught. Over the next few days, the evidence uncovered everything. Fake invoices, altered meeting minutes, and bank transfers to private accounts belonging to board members. The HOA had been bleeding residents dry for years under the guise of community fees. The runway was just their biggest mistake, the one that exposed them to the world. By the end of the week, federal charges were filed. Karen and 2 other board members were arrested for fraud, misuse of funds, and unauthorized use of federal land. The news spread like wildfire, and the HOA dissolved overnight. For the first time in years, the people of Oak Ridge didn't have to live in fear of fines, threats, or bogus rules. That night, as I stood at the edge of my damaged field, the sky above was streaked with fading colors of dusk. The wheat was gone, the soil still torn, but I felt something I hadn't felt since this all began: peace. The farm would recover, and so would I. The land had always been patient. It had endured storms, droughts, and greed. It would endure this too. I took a deep breath, watching the stars flicker to life one by one. The storm was far from over, but the truth was finally shining through. And that, I thought, was worth every battle. Morning broke with an uneasy calm over the valley. The sky glowed orange, reflecting off the long, concrete runway that sliced through my family's once green farm. But this time, it wasn't the sound of bulldozers or HOA board members barking orders that filled the air. It was the steady hum of private jets being prepared for takeoff, all lined up neatly, ready to showcase the HOA executive airstrip to the world. I stood at the edge of the field, arms crossed, watching everything unfold exactly as I'd planned. Today was the day they'd learn that some lines, once crossed, can never be undone. Karen, the HOA president, strutted out like she owned the place in her bright red blazer, clipboard in hand, chin high. "Mr. Hayes," she sneered, "you're welcome to stand back and watch how professionals handle real estate value. This runway will make every property here worth millions." I smiled calmly. "Oh, I'm watching, Karen, every inch of it." She didn't realize the irony. The airstrip she was so proud of was about to become her undoing. The FAA, and federal inspectors were already stationed nearby, hidden from sight, waiting for my signal. Every piece of evidence I'd gathered, from fake zoning permits to falsified safety reports, was filed and sealed under my authority as U.S. Secretary of Transportation. Today wasn't just about getting my land back. It was about showing that greed can't bulldoze over justice. As the first jet engine roared to life, I raised my phone and gave the call. Within seconds, a convoy of federal vehicles turned onto the road, sirens flashing. Karen's confident smirk faded as black SUVs surrounded the airstrip. Federal agents stepped out, badges shining in the sunlight. The crowd of HOA members who had gathered for the grand opening froze in confusion. "What's the meaning of this?" Karen shouted, her voice cracking slightly. Agent Miller, my chief investigator, approached her. "Ma'am, this property has been declared a restricted federal area. You are in violation of U.S. aviation and zoning laws, among several other charges. Please step aside." Her face went pale. "You can't do this. This is private HOA land." I stepped forward, standing only a few feet from her. "No, Karen, it's federal property, and you built your runway right across a government-protected transportation corridor." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "You set us up." "No," I replied evenly. "You set yourself up when you ignored the law. I just let the law do its job." The agents began taping off the area as inspectors moved in to document the violations. The runway, the equipment, even the HOA office that had been built with funds from illegal land use, all were seized under federal authority. Karen tried to argue, waving papers and shouting about community rights, but every word fell apart when the truth came to light. As the chaos unfolded, my phone buzzed. A message from the governor's office flashed across the screen. "Excellent work, Secretary Hayes. You've just exposed one of the largest HOA land fraud cases in the state." I looked back at my land scarred. Yes, but finally free. The concrete strip would soon be demolished, and the soil restored to what it was meant to be, a place of peace, not greed. By afternoon, Karen was in handcuffs. Escorted to one of the black SUVs, she passed me with a mix of anger and shame. "You'll regret this," she hissed. I shook my head. "No, Karen, I'll rebuild this land the right way." The reporters swarmed as the story hit national headlines. HOA builds illegal airstrip, U.S. Secretary of Transportation leads raid on owned property. Cameras clicked, and microphones surrounded me as I gave a short statement. This isn't just about my land, I said. It's about reminding every homeowner that laws exist to protect, not to exploit. When power is abused, it will always be held accountable. Weeks later, the demolition began. Watching the bulldozers tear down the very runway that had symbolized the HOA's arrogance was oddly satisfying. In its place, I started a new project, a small community airfield, legally approved, publicly accessible, and dedicated to teaching local kids about aviation. The sign at the entrance read, Hayesfield, where integrity takes flight. The farm slowly came back to life. The scent of soil and grass replaced the smell of concrete and jet fuel. The sound of laughter echoed again, not the echo of vengeance. My family, my workers, and my neighbors all helped restore what had been stolen. And every time I looked at that land, I felt a deep sense of pride. Not just because I'd won, but because justice had. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I stood on the rebuilt field, hands in my pockets, watching a small training plane soar overhead. It wasn't power or revenge that filled me, it was peace. Sometimes, the best victories aren't loud. They're quiet, steady, and rooted in truth. Karen and the entire HOA board were eventually convicted of multiple charges: fraud, land, misappropriation, and obstruction. The fines alone were enough to dissolve their entire organization. The community, freed from their rule, voted to form a new council built on transparency and fairness. As for me, I continued my duties in Washington, using my story as a lesson in every policy meeting I attended. Never underestimate the value of the ground beneath your feet, I'd say. It tells the story of who you are and what you stand for. And that's exactly what my farm would always be, a reminder that no one, no matter how powerful, can pave over the truth. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more powerful real-life inspired tales on HOA Bright Reality. Stay tuned, the next story might just take flight where you least expect it.